Okay, so here are some of the biggest stories that we're going to be getting this morning. Yes, some of the biggest stories that we'll be getting from the papers this morning. So you're going to hear today that, the federal government, that's the presidency, has ordered a manhunt on the people who raised down hell in Kaduna State, if I can say that. A really sad story that I brought your way yesterday, and this morning we're getting from the papers now what the government plans to do with them. Let's hope that they are caught. And then we're also going to be talking about some other stories, how the fake agency probe house faces pressure to summon Bajabiamila. And then we will talk about how PFIPC was created. So many other stories that are making headlines this morning. That's how I welcome you to the Daily Brief on Big Heart 92.1 FM, the station that beats for you. I am Marvelous Akmi, and today on the Daily Brief, as usual, we'll be taking headlines from The Punch, The Nation, The Guardian, and The Vanguard newspaper. So don't touch that dial. The newspaper review show starts shortly. All right, we'll be starting first with the Punch newspaper. And on the Punch this morning, we have federal government overshoots borrowing limit. Federal government overshoots borrowing limit as new debt reaches 12.6 trillion naira. Government misses revenue target by 4.9 trillion despite higher non-oil earnings. And then also we have budget deficit balloons by 47% above projection, and fresh loans bankrolled 36% of 2024 spending, budget office reports. All right, and also on the Punch, we have Tinubu orders security chiefs to fish out Kaduna killers. Tinubu orders security chiefs to fish out Kaduna killers, and that's on page 17 of the Punch. US-Iran war, Nigeria tops Africa in petrol price surge. US-Iran war, Nigeria tops Africa in petrol price surge. That's on page 22 of the Punch. And then we have Makinde unveils 2 new surveillance aircraft to combat insecurity. Makinde unveils 2 new surveillance aircraft to combat insecurity. And then we have also collapsed building, 3 dead, 12 rescued as Ogun begins probe. Collapsed building, 3 dead, 12 rescued as Ogun State begins its probe. And then we have State Police, governors must control CPs. Southern Middle Belt leaders insist. State Police, governors must control commissioners of police as Southern Middle Belt leaders insist. Also on the Punch, we have Appeal Court restores ADC Atiku Mark Adeleke celebrate. Appeal Court restores ADC Atiku Mark Adeleke celebrate, and that's on page 8 of the Punch. Police silent as reps ultimatum on fake agency DG expires today. Police silent as reps ultimatum on fake agency DG expires today. And we have EFCC faces credibility questions over assets auction. EFCC faces credibility questions over assets auction. And then we have 2027 Tinubu challenges rivals, vows to fight to finish. 2027 Tinubu challenges rivals, vows to fight to finish. And that's on the Punch. Let's move on now to The Nation, where we have xenophobia. Federal government demands justice from South Africa. On xenophobia, federal government demands justice from South Africa. And then we have underneath that story, INEC neutral and fair to all parties, says Tinubu. INEC neutral, fair to all parties, says Tinubu. E-payments penetration drops cash outside banks to 4.9 trillion naira. E-payments penetration drops cash outside banks to 4.9 trillion naira. We have 3 killed as building sinks in Ajuwon community near Lagos. That's on page 51 of The Nation. And also on The Nation newspaper, we have ADC hails appeal court verdict voiding order to deregister parties. ADC hails appeal court verdict voiding order to deregister parties. And then we have 18 killed in Benue Taraba communities. 18 killed in Benue Taraba communities. And that's on The Nation newspaper, page 51. All right, and that's all from The Nation newspaper. Let's move on to The Guardian, where it says gubernatorial candidates and parties unsettled by running mate hurdles. Gubernatorial candidates, parties unsettled by running mate hurdles. And that's on page 6 of The Guardian. Also, we have Tinubu orders manhunt as northern elders decry fresh killings in region. Tinubu orders manhunt as northern elders decry fresh killings in region. 2027 Afenifere Ohaneze Middle Belt Pandef forge fresh alliance. 2027 Afenifere Ohaneze Middle Belt Pandef forge fresh alliance, and it's on page 3. 9 million lack access to HIV treatment as new infection rise, says WHO. 9 million lack access to HIV treatment as new infection rise. That's coming from the WHO. And then we have opposition hails ruling as appeal court voids deregistration, restores ADC, and 4 others. Federal government to spend 46 billion naira on Kano Airport runway reconstruction. Federal government to spend 46 million naira on Kano Airport runway reconstruction. And then we have Lagos State government moves to tighten safety standards for high-rise buildings. Lagos State government moves to tighten safety standards for high-rise buildings. And then we have federal government to spend 40. Okay, taking that story. 2 surveillance aircraft arrive in Ibadan to enhance statewide security. 2 surveillance aircraft arrive in Ibadan to enhance statewide security. And that's on Panorama page 2 of The Guardian newspaper. All right, now let's move on to The Vanguard. On The Vanguard, we have the registration of ADC others was judicial rascality. The registration of ADC orders was judicial rascality. That's coming from the appeal court as it slams Justice Lafiu's action. And then verdict corrected grave miscarriage of justice. That's coming from the ADC. 2027 polls must be won at ballot, not in court. That's coming from Atiku. He says 2027 polls must be won at ballot, not in court. Atiku. And then we have plot to stop Adeleke thwarted. That's coming from the governor's camp. Okay, and also we have Oyo State surveillance aircraft arrive, and if you take a look at the cover, you see pictures of a surveillance aircraft that has just arrived Oyo State. And the 2 surveillance aircraft were purchased by Oyo State government after their arrival at the upgraded international airport in Ibadan on Tuesday. Gunmen kill army colonel in Abuja, shoot wife. Gunmen kill army colonel in Abuja, shoot wife. And mob kills Unijust graduate over alleged phone theft. And fresh Benue attacks leave 16 dead, many injured. Mob kills Unijust graduate over alleged theft. And fresh Benue attacks leave 16 dead, many injured. Commercial celebrates 10 years, launches Women Impact Fund. That's on page 21. Oyo receives 2 surveillance aircrafts to boost security. You can find that on page 14 of the Vanguard. Nigeria demands justice, compensation after Afrophobic attacks. That's from the federal government to South Africa. Nigeria demands justice and compensation after Afrophobic attacks. And we have Tinubu orders manhunt for Kaduna killers. Tinubu orders manhunt for Kaduna killers. All right, you can find that on page 37 of the Vanguard newspaper. All right, this morning we've had some really interesting headlines on the papers this morning, and we took headlines from The Guardian that said governorship candidates parties unsettled by running mate hurdles. And yes, as we know, governorship candidates, they are usually more than just running mates. All right, they are more than just running mates. They are more than just ceremonial figures because you want them to be there because it's necessary. Sometimes political parties, they usually consider a regional balance, sometimes religion, which we had for the last presidential election, which might also still come up, and then also ethnic representation. We talk about how some ethnic groups in the state or in the country, usually they feel that they should all be represented. So we shouldn't have a governorship and a deputy governorship candidate coming from one tribe or from one region, or even the same political experience. They should have different political experiences so that by the time they get into office, they would know how to manage it. And then also electoral strength, which is very important. How strong are you politically? How popular are you? Do you have enough followers when you are picked? Would you have enough people who you can talk to that would support you? So these are some of the considerations. So sometimes disagreements over deputy governorship candidates or vice presidential candidates become more controversial, even more than the governorship candidates itself, because we had this for the last election and it was really controversial, particularly for the presidential election, where we had them running on a Muslim ticket that received a whole lot of controversy and backlashes. So sometimes these unresolved disputes could mar the election. So that's why the governorship candidates and parties are usually unsettled by running mate hurdles, which was the headline we had on The Guardian. And then also we took a headline from The Nation that talked about federal government demands for justice from South Africa over xenophobic attacks. Yesterday we had on the papers that the presidency had snubbed the envoy from Ramaphosa, and then the foreign ministry later on attended to the envoy. And then The Nation reports that Nigeria is pressing South African authorities following renewed attacks reportedly targeting Nigerians and other African nationals. Nigeria and South Africa maintain one of Africa's biggest diplomatic and economic relationships. So whenever attacks occur, there's usually diplomatic pressure, businesses become concerned, citizens abroad become fearful, like we have had this recent repatriation by the Nigerian government. So at this point, if the Nigerian government is demanding justice, I feel it is necessary. It is really necessary. Okay, and we talked about the registration of ADC and others, the appeal court calling that a judicial rascality. Vanguard talked about the headline, that's the appeal court judgment over overturning the registration of some political parties like the ADC. All right, those were some of the stories that made headlines this morning. And then we talked about President Tinubu reportedly directing security agencies to intensify efforts against recent killings in Kaduna State. And that's also worthy of mention. We got the report yesterday of so many persons losing their lives, and then we talked about the effects of this. People get displaced, children get orphaned. At the end of the day, what happens to these children? They might grow up to become the problems themselves because they've had no one to guide them all their lives. And at this point, we should take security very seriously in this country. Well, it's 25 minutes past 8 a.m. and that's how we wrap up today's edition of the Daily Brief. Thank you so much for making us a part of your Wednesday morning. I am Marvelous Akbe. Till I come your way again next time, keep listening to Big Hearts 92.1 FM Asaba. It's bye for now.